So good morning and welcome to the BSA Annual Meeting. As some of you, or most of you know, my name is Natasha Espada and I'm the founding principal of Studio & Architects and the 2020 president of the Boston Society of Architects. So now I would like to call the meeting to order. Eric, do we need to have a motion or just call it to order?
Sorry, just called to order.
Okay, so for today's agenda, we have our special keynote presentation by Dr. Atyia Martin from 8:05 to 8:30. We have a Q&A from 8:30 to 8:40, passing the gavel to Greg Minott, my colleague and the 2021 BSA president. Ted Touloukian, the BSA Foundation chair, will do a 2020 review and a 2021 preview for our public work. Dan Peruzzi, the BSA AIA treasurer, will do the 2021 budget review and a vote. And hopefully we can adjourn, and we will adjourn at 9 a.m. So meeting guidelines. So please mute yourself and use the chat function for general questions and for the Q&A session. And then for members to vote on the 2021 budget, please submit your vote in the chat function and it will be recorded and then it will be tallied. We are recording and there's an image release. So please note that the annual meeting will be recorded and you agree to that image release. And then I want to talk a little bit about our One BSA. So as many of you know, over a year ago, the BSA board voted on becoming One BSA. We're the Boston Society for Architecture, and it's the umbrella for two nonprofit organizations. We have the Boston Society of Architects, the BSA AIA, which is where I'm the 2020 president of that board, and it's our membership organization. It's the oldest and the second largest chapter of the AIA, and I believe we have approximately 4,500 members. And then the other one is the BSA Foundation, the other organization, which is the public and community outreach organization that Ted is going to talk about at the end of the meeting. So together as one, we are the Boston Society for Architecture, One BSA. So we, as you know, both of these organizations have board members, and I would like to now thank and congratulate our outgoing BSA AIA board members, including Jean Caroon, FAIA, who was the past president and has been a mentor to me for many years, Mariano Campo, an associate AIA, George Proakis, who is AICP. And I would also like to acknowledge all the outgoing knowledge community chairs. Thank you all for your time, work, and dedication to the BSA. And we hope that you continue to be involved in many other ways. So for the past year, it has been a true honor and a privilege to be the president of the BSA AIA board and to work closely with a group of truly exceptional board members. Also working closely with Eric White as executive director, who always does an amazing job, especially this year, which has been trying and exciting at the same time. And with Ted Touloukian as the chair of the BSA Foundation, who has really been a true partner. I also want to acknowledge Billy and the entire BSA staff who work tirelessly behind the scenes every day, including today, to make the BSA everything seamless and a true success. And also one more is to thank the FAIAs and the BSA past presidents for their guidance throughout this year. So as we all know, 2020 was a challenging year, but as I have said many times and I've said all year, it also, with challenges come a lot of opportunities. And we have witnessed some silver linings, and I'm very proud of what the BSA has been able to accomplish in 2020. So one of the silver linings, as I just mentioned in the chat, in the room we were just in, is the fact that we have virtual meetings such as this one. It has allowed the BSA to be more accessible, more visible, and more supportive to our membership, the firms, students, and to the public. And really our programs have increased in attendance because of this. And also, since the beginning of the spring, we have been supporting firms, members, and students through COVID. And we will continue to do this through next year and as long as we have to. This also led us to create a stronger alliances with other agencies and allied membership organizations and to create united fronts in policy and in advocacy. So in 2020, and next slide, please. In 2020, the BSA is focused on these four priorities: advancing architecture, equity and justice, environment, and community. And we've been able to accomplish a lot of things with this focus. Next. We have also had several conferences. We hosted two successful conferences, and both of them were really well attended. There was the practice-based research in the fall and the Embodied Carbon 101 in the spring, in the summer. And we have also been very active in the promotion of the EZ Net Zero Code. This has been done in partnership with AIA Massachusetts, and I want to thank board members Andrea Love, Jacob Knowles, Ellen Watts, and the AIA Massachusetts board members representing the BSA, and all others who were involved with this hard work creating and supporting this initiative. Next. And then one of the main goals of my presidency this year was to promote equity, diversity, inclusion, and social justice in Boston. So for the past 3 years, I've been one of the co-chairs of the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Task Force. This year, the task force has increased to 75 members, and we're very proud to say that. We began the year with an EDI town hall. We have truly been trying to support and promote Bosnoma and women in design. And we revised our mission to advocate, educate, support, and measure our EDI progress. And we're continuing to do it, creating timelines, and we will have that document to you at the beginning of the year. We've also had YW Boston educate and train the staff and some of the board members this year, and we've created both an LGBTQ knowledge community and an EDI knowledge community. Next. So the EDI knowledge community has been providing seminars on the AIA's guides for equitable practice. And we also created an equity and practice resource guide to support our membership. If you haven't seen it, everything is on the website, architects.org. Next. And also, very importantly, in the spring, after the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many others, we engaged Artists for Humanity to create a logo for a series on race and architecture. And the series highlights BIPOC architects, and we've had conversations on education, policy, and advocacy, stories with Black architects, and other important topics. So the next one will be held in January and will continue through 2021. So please join us for these really important conversations. And with that, as I highlighted the importance of equity and all of the work that we've been doing, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Atyia Martin, who will be speaking about the intersection of the 4 priorities of the BSA: architecture, equity, environment, and community. Dr. Martin is the CEO and founder of All Aces, Inc., a racial equity applied learning partner for organizations with a mission to activate consciousness, catalyze critical thinking, and transform capabilities that advance racial equity and build resilience. Dr. Martin is a distinguished senior fellow at Northeastern University's Global Resilience Institute. Her previous professional roles include Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Boston, Director of the Office of Public Health Preparedness at the Boston Public Health Commission, and adjunct faculty in the Master of Homeland Security and Public Policy programs at Northeastern University. So please help me welcome Dr. Atyia Martin.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate you. It's a pleasure to be here with my architect family. I think the most important thing to know about me out of all of those professional parts of my background is that my husband and I have 5 children, 2 still at home, 3 out in the world. And as I always say, they're now somebody else's problem. And really, that has been my greatest learning when it comes to what it means to do good work, what it means to be able to navigate discomfort, to navigate uncertainty, to navigate the ambiguity of the world, volatility. That being a parent really was, and being intentional about acknowledging that those were realities that we had to confront really helped me to have a different perspective on my professional life and to be able to integrate them in ways that have been very helpful to me. And how that relates to today is, I'm going to talk a bit about the intersection of resilience, of community, racial equity, and social justice, and architecture. And so when I think about why we have struggled so much to kind of figure out what are the things that we need to do to have a more socially just society, to be able to do our work as architects. I'm not an architect, but I'm just like, co-opting your identities right now. That as architects out in the world, really wanting to create beautiful things that support people's quality of life that contribute to a long-term legacy and impact, and that has amazing design, right? We want all of those things to be true in the world with our work. And so our ability to do that and to be a proactive disruptor of oppression in the process is really the crux of the work. And really a lot of the discussion that I'm going to go through today connects the dots between our individual roles and responsibilities, who we are as people, how that shows up in the work, how it impacts the way we engage with communities, how it impacts the way that we even approach design and problem solving, and where are some of the opportunities for us to do our work differently, to do better, to be better with how we are not just doing our work, but how we're engaging with each other, how we're engaging with communities, to rehumanize ourselves and each other. So all that said, I'm going to share my screen because I do have a couple of things I'm going to use to keep me on track so that I do not abuse my time here with you all, because you have a lot to talk about beyond me being here today. So that said, I'm going to pull this up very quickly. And that's not even one moment.
And we will be having a question and answer session. So please write your answers in the chat so that we can keep them in order to ask Dr. Atyia during the Q&A.
So you heard our mission earlier, and for All ACEs, the work that we do really is mission driven. It's also values driven, and all of those things are contributing to how we want to make impact in our communities and in the organizations that we're partnering with to do our work. So really we start with this place of hoping that we can have resilient people and organizations with the humanity to foster belonging, with the humility to learn, and the hope to envision a more racially equitable world. This is our vision, and our mission that you heard earlier really directly contributes to that, which is to make sure that we are advancing consciousness, catalyzing critical thinking, and advancing capabilities that help us support racial equity and building resilience. And so I'm not gonna go into the weeds on this. I'm not gonna get in trouble for my business manager. You all are my proof that I showed you this. This is the work that we do in general with clients. And really the thing that we're most excited about right now is our learning community, which really supports our overall core values, our mission, and our vision with our focus on racial equity and resilience. And the fact that we're all struggling with figuring these things out and need community in order to help us. And the more you learn, the more sophisticated that we get in our understanding, the lonelier it can be sometimes to be in real relationship and conversation. And one of the challenges that we know that we have in community, in the spirit of the race series that BSA already has going on, is kind of racism and other forms of oppression. And so I'm jumping into the hard stuff right up front, because the whole point of racial equity and social justice is that there's a problem we're trying to solve for. So if you'll humor me, if you'll put in the chat, what are the most important components of understanding what racism is? How do you define racism? You don't have to have a whole super well thought out definition, but just components. And we're going to do some collective intelligence here and create a way for us to have a shared understanding. So go ahead and put it in there. Thank you, Laura. You get a virtual gold star for being the first one to put yourself out there. Awareness, that's right. begins with awareness, even just understanding that we don't know what we don't know, and that we actually have to go on a learning journey. The lack of empathy, right? The fear that comes with it, the lack of equity. And someone said hatred, right? At the extreme end of the spectrum, you see this sense of you can see that sense of hatred, bias, lack of understanding, dehumanizing others. Yes, dehumanization is a huge part of what facilitates oppression, and in this case, racism. Otherness, yes, us having kind of that group think that solidifies our connection to groups that we belong to, in this case, race and ethnicity. And not that that's a problem. The challenge becomes when we are so entrenched in that we can only see the world through the lens of those groups and experiences, and making it harder for us to connect and empathize with one another. Yes, that lack of self-awareness. So in the beginning, someone said self-awareness, and this person is pointing out, Daniel is pointing out that it's a lack of self-awareness. Viewing someone as different based on just one piece of who they are. Yes. So you all can see that when we collectively put our minds together, we can come up with some pretty amazing things. This is why community engagement, this is why collective work and collective action is so powerful, because any one of us may not have felt very confident about our ability to define racism in a way that we would put this, amazing definition together. But collectively, we're able to pull the pieces together and have a very robust set of perspectives on what racism is. And this piece around objectification that Andrea, I apologize, but I'm going to say both pronunciations just in case, put in there is really important as well, because it's related to that dehumanization piece. And so when we talk about racism at All Aces, we talk about all of these pieces, and that there are layers to it. Some people have heard of the 4 eyes of oppression. We often talk about layers of oppression, because sometimes when we think of them as these boxes separate from one another, it's harder to see how they create a system, how all of these things overlap on top of one another. And so to begin with, racism is a historically rooted, right? It's very historically rooted set of dehumanizing ideas, right? Which is at the center of everything. The ideas are ground zero. That is the foundation. Everything is built on top of the ideas. And the ideas are centered around Black, Indigenous, and other people of color not having power, and this idea that there's some inferiority there, that it's innate. And most of us don't think these things consciously, but we've been exposed to these constant ideas our whole lives. And through the media, through friends, family, others. And what's important, the most important pieces are that we oftentimes don't realize how we've internalized those ideas, right? And how they influence the way that we think about the world, think about ourselves, think about other people, think about communities that we're working with. And in absence of knowing that, what we do is we engage with each other based on these ideas, right? We've internalized them. We see ourselves a certain way. We see other people a certain way. We engage with each other. And in the process of engaging with each other, we are using these flawed ways of seeing each other that perpetuate the inequities. And then all 3 of those things, the ideas, the internalization, the interpersonal interaction, show up in organizations. They show up in our firms, in our businesses. And then when people talk about structural, what they're really talking about is all of the different institutions that that BIPOC have to engage with, that create this structured set of experiences that reinforces racism, oppression, and reinforces the experiences. Now, the other part is that racism is one of those things, and all forms of oppression are really limiting to all of us, in the sense that it tries to put all of us in a box. People of color, BIPOC are supposed to be over here and white people are supposed to be over here with these types of traits and characteristics. And in the process, we're all struggling with our identity and who we are and who we want to be and how we want to show up in the world. So being able to redefine this is very important. And when we think about racial equity, we're really talking about kind of how we unlearn some ideas, how we learn more about how human nature, why we do what we do, how we've been impacted, and being able to then decide for ourselves that piece I mentioned earlier, who do we want to be as individuals, as institutions? How do we want to engage with each other? All of these things are built on top of values. All of these things are built on top of a clear vision of who we want to be in this world. And when I say who, I'm talking about institutions as well, our organizations. And we have the ability to help create spaces in an organization that help facilitate folks showing up as their best self. Why is this important to how we engage with the community? Because our internal organizational dysfunction leaves the organization and seeps into the community, right? So when we're not doing this work internally as individuals, when we're not doing this work in our organizations, we go into communities and we bring all that not our best selves with us into the community. When we haven't started doing this work. Doesn't mean you're ever a finished product. I'm not a finished product, constant work in progress. And I live and breathe with all the research, nerdy stuff, the experiences, the doing work with organizations. But it's an ongoing journey and process because we're constantly getting bombarded with the ideas that reinforce those unhealthy ideas and boxes that people have been put into, that dehumanization. And what's really important for us in this context is understanding that there's a lot that we can do about this. Now, I know the tendency for us is wanting to run out and kind of save the world, right? We want to save people of color. We want to do all of these amazing things. And that's not a thing that's possible because we cannot save people in that way unless someone's in a burning building, right? What we can do is partner with people. What we can do is own our own roles and responsibilities. And so the whole world of concern around racism and its challenges that it presents really requires us to understand where we can place our energy, our circle of influence to really impact and shift the dynamics. And then the piece around how we allow the external world to drive us can constrain where we can see the possibilities for action. But when we focus on ourselves, our organizations, our networks, it means that we're channeling our energy in more constructive, productive ways, right? And when we do that, the more action we take, law of numbers, right? The more action we take, the more likely we're actually to have some successes. And then when we join with other folks to take strategic action, we actually expand that influence significantly. And the goal here is that we're spending less time as conductors of oppression and more time as active, proactive disruptors of oppression. And so that means for us that we have to shift our thinking to be less autopilot, right? When we're on autopilot, we know we're not our best selves. And sometimes we're in situations, someone calls us out on the fact that we're on autopilot. They don't say it that way, but they're like, hey, what's going on? And then we finally wake up and we're back in control again. But when we're not intentional about what we're doing, when we're not present and we're not intentional, we're oftentimes passive conductors of oppression versus the opportunities we have to be proactive disruptors. So we won't have time for me to go through this, but you will have a link to this presentation so that you can go through this for yourself. Because even if I did go through it, it's still a lot to digest. And I generally don't put a lot of words on the screen, but these concepts are really important to understand. What are the ways that oppression flows through us, through our organizations? And what are the things that we do as individuals and in organizations that reinforce oppression in ways that we don't mean to? And a lot of times the infrastructure that we've created or the structure we've created in our organizations then reinforces and facilitates that. Now, where I'm going to land with you today, as not to take up too much time, is to point out that racism isn't a thing of the past. I know George Floyd has really awakened a lot of people who weren't paying attention to this, how severe the problems are, but there are a number of articles that have been around for years, for decades. People have been studying this in all different ways. People have been studying it from the perspective of how it directly impacts communities. People have been studying it in a way and looking at health impacts, specific diseases like diabetes. People have been studying it, and even to the point of this is a lot of nerdy stuff. So the translation is, this is a study about people's lives, the years of life lost. And the telomere is a part of your RNA, which is part of your DNA, that shows how many years have been worn by the ways that we've been living our lives. And they've been able to look at DNA and see the differences in how many years of life are lost for in this particular study, African American men. And there's some hope in terms of our ability to shift and adjust how we engage with the world and how we do things differently in order to reduce those impacts. Heart attacks, right? People have been studying how racism actually is leading to increases in heart attacks for people of color, particularly Black people. And then this whole idea of, well, what should we be doing about all this stuff? You know, these ideas have been thrown around about cultural competency, and, you know, shouldn't we be doing that? And there's been questions about whether or not that's effective and if that facilitates more, because basically saying you could do a training and learn everything you need to know about culture in people's lives. And then this last couple of pieces are really about the psychological impacts that actually there have been for decades people lobbying to see racism as an explicit form of trauma listed in the official diagnostic book that psychologists use. Same thing here. In the types of strategies that people need in order that they're constantly calibrating in order to address the types of interactions that happen when it comes to racism and racial equity. So here's where I'm going to land for you all, which is, how do we do this differently, right? So we talked about the internal, as individuals, how we show up matters, and our ability to manage ourselves better, our ability to collectively in organizations think differently about how we approach the work. What you see on the left-hand side of your screen are partnership opportunities, which are different ways of thinking about the processes that we usually go through when we're engaging on projects. So how the problem that our clients are asking us to solve for, that the client has a problem definition, and if it involves community, making sure that we're engaging with the community around making sure that that's actually the full context for the problem that you're going to be spending all this time on engaging in. And then the actual engagement process, that's usually where we tend to focus on, you know, getting people to weigh in on the project, and there's opportunities for that to be a different dynamic as well, where we can really spend more time looking at how we actually go through the process in a way that there's some decision making and all the ideas haven't been fully baked, that people actually have a voice because they're the context experts. Contracting for equity, as we're going through the process, that we're actually be paying attention to how we're spending our money as organizations when we're in community, even if we're doing virtual work. How do we make sure that we're spending money in the communities that we're actually doing projects in? Doing a burdens benefit analysis to make sure that we understand what are the burdens that the community might have to take on because of this initiative, this project, and we're making sure that they're also, and that we mitigate those things and change things as we need to, but also what are the benefits that are available for folks to really do this work well? What are the benefits that we make sure that the community has access to? What are the alternatives? I mentioned that, the equitable distribution of the benefits. So once the project is finished, that we know that folks, we've actually done that analysis to make sure that folks are benefiting from the project, that the actual implementation of the project ensures that people, BIPOC and other underestimated communities, groups are part of the process of implementing the project, the building, construction, all those pieces, and then evaluation. Who gets to decide if it was actually a good thing? right? We generally come up with our own metrics, right? However, the challenge becomes ultimately it's the community is going to be engaging with our projects. And so how do we make sure that the community is part of the evaluation process of if this thing was actually good, not just the final product, but the process as well. So I'm going to stop there because I tried to cover a lot in a little bit of time. And someone said, how do I feel about sharing the articles? Absolutely. Please share the articles with folks because although I'll warn all of you, because they're those peer-reviewed articles, they are not written for real people, and you'll do a lot of time, you spend a lot of time translating. So I'll share the PowerPoint. I'll also share the articles. And then for one of them, it's really, really jargony and technical. So I'll send the supporting, there's a summary of it that's in English that I'll send to you as well. So thank you all very much for allowing me to be a part of your morning today. And I went a little bit over, and now it's time for us to do some Q&A is what I was told.
Yes, and please put your questions on the chat, and then we can get through them. I have a quick question about when you're saying evaluation and creating metrics. Do you have any suggestions for how to create these metrics and what you're looking for besides making, how do we, in the sense for the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Task Force, trying to create support and education and and advocacy, but also how to measure these things to see and have accountability for them. Do you have any suggestions for how we can do that?
A few. So if we're talking about the internal organizations, that's a co-created thing, right? Like we actually spend time collectively in our organization talking through what are our goals, who do we want to be? Because for each organization, it's going to be different. And then being able to map whatever we say is important to us to ways that we're going to measure that. And it's not always quantitative data, right? There's going to be a lot of qualitative data because that really gets into the how, right? The quantitative tells you what, like there's this thing that's happening, but the qualitative stuff, the community engagement, I mean, and when I say community engagement in an organization, we're talking about the employee experience, employee engagement. Externally, it's similar, but there's more of a foundation you can start with. Right. And so being able to leverage some of the surveys that have been done, quality surveys, that there's some nonprofits who do a really good job of when they deliver services to clients. The follow-up survey that they do really does a good job of capturing both quantitative and qualitative information that helps them understand whether or not folks got what they needed and whether or not the experience of engaging with the process or with the organization actually was respectful of their dignity and who they are. And so being able to kind of have both of those components in there. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's really helpful. So you said that's more internal, but for the community or for the external.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't do the clean
No,
pivot.
this is good.
Yeah, so the clean pivot was when it comes to community, is when I was referring to the nonprofit survey, right? So those are good ones to look at, and there's a couple of, I think, promising ones, particularly promising ones that do that good balance of if you're in community and you're trying to figure out if your process went well. Being able to have both those types of measures that are quantitative, but also qualitative, in the sense that that's where I was talking about kind of like the dignity piece, where did people feel respected in the process, and did they feel like the process actually worked, that it went well, and that there are some great resources out there for those, and I'm happy to share those as well. That might take me a little longer because I'll have to read through them to make sure I get you some good ones. But we'll get you some examples there. I'm just writing it down because I have to.
Oh, and another question that I have, and please others write questions here, is, it's easy to engage those who want to change and who are looking for education and for all of that. It's difficult for those that are not even aware that they need to change or that their organization needs to change and don't understand that, including, municipalities and other locations, right? And firms. And how do you engage situations where people don't understand that they're not part of the change, or they don't understand that they need, that there is an issue or need to change.
Yeah, I might reframe it a little bit to be more about how all of us have work to do to evolve and change. And then when we think about it from that perspective, then it allows us to have a little bit more empathy for folks who haven't had the, dare I say, privileges of learning and building their, not just their knowledge, but their skills around how to navigate in these different spaces. And I didn't really talk about the skills, but the specific skills that are really important are number one, racial equity literacy and social justice literacy, understanding what racism is, how it works, the historical context, especially in urban design and planning. There's a ton of history that we don't learn in school. And if we didn't learn it in school and we never sought it out because we didn't know to seek it out because we didn't know it was there, then we just don't know. And most of us don't actually know that historical context that helps us to connect the dots between why today looks the way it does. And then the other few I'll quickly mention are emotional intelligence, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, social management, or relationship management, communication, our ability to communicate with ourselves, our ability to communicate with other people, and in that communication piece, making sure that we understand that two-way street, the listening part is a skill, and how we communicate is a skill, and that we're doing it in a way that's caring but also authentic, and honest. The other one is conflict management. Our ability to stop avoiding conflict, because it's actually a clarifier. It helps us get closer to each other when we go through conflict. If we think about the folks who are closest to us in our lives, we pretty much had a lot of conflict with them. And we're in a place where we actually can interact with each other in ways where we don't have to tiptoe around one another and all those things, because we know this, I know that these things upset this person and I know these other things don't. And in organizations is particularly important. And the last one is critical thinking, our ability to have a process to manage our thinking and our decision making, that we're clear about why we're making decisions, and having a process and learning that as a skill. So when we think about how we approach others, from the perspective of making sure that we meet them where they are, right? And that everyone is on a spectrum. And some of us, including myself, can be at different places on that spectrum, depending on the day and time of day and what I just got exposed to and those types of things. Someone asked a question, and I want to make sure I get to, who sent it to me privately, in terms of the process. How do I recommend that businesses provide ongoing engagement with the discussion of these issues within the business? And I think part of the challenge, and thank you for that question, and I won't say who the person is because they asked me privately. Part of the challenge is that we tend to think of this work as something separate, almost as an extracurricular activity over here, and then the work is over here, when we have to bring those things together, because how we do the work is in essence the things we need to do to advance racial equity and social justice in the workplace, right? So our ability to look at what we're doing to see how far we are away from who we want to be, getting clearer about that, but then doing that delta, what's the difference between the two? And then that gives us a shared conversation that we can be in on an ongoing basis, that is structured, that is helpful, but also is focused on action and holding ourselves and each other accountable. Because a lot of times we will have the sense that we want to create spaces for people to sit around talking, and that's important. And as an organization, you'll also notice that people want action. They want to see some things moving. And the way to combine the two is to have these focused conversations on shifting the dynamics in the organization, and doing that collectively as a team, as an organization, within our units, within organizations. And then the last, there are several more, and I know we're running out of time. How much time do we have left?
I think we just ran out.
We just ran out.
But I think what this is saying is that we need to have you back.
Well, I am happy to come back. I appreciate you all. And, I'll end just by saying that this work is hard. There's nothing easy about it. I wish there was an equation or an easy button I can give each and every one of you to make all of this happen. But really, the hard work of it really is really, and I'm gonna say this again, really about finding ourselves in all of this, right? Like if we're not able to look in the mirror as individuals, collectively in organizations, we're not really gonna have the kind of transformational impact that we need, because it's easier to look at everybody else, and that's our default. But our ability to sit in that mirror and really do that work, that's how we have that kind of transformational kind of collective impact when we commit to doing those things. So thank you all for having me, and thank you for allowing me to go over just a little bit.
Oh, and I would like to, yes, I would like to thank Dr. Martin for this inspiring conversation. And I have a feeling we're going to see a lot more of her because there's a lot to talk about. So I would also now continue our presentation with the passing of the gavel ceremony. So this means that my 2020 presidency comes to a close, which is bittersweet, but I am so honored to be presenting the gavel to my colleague and fellow board member and president-elect Greg Minott, who will now be the 2021 president of the BSA. So Greg, it really has been a pleasure working with you this past year and for many years on the board, and I know that you are going to do a terrific job. So thank you all, and I hand you off to Greg.
All right, thank you so much, Natasha. And I wish we were in person to be able to do this and pass a physical gavel, but in lieu of that, I have a maraca, so to celebrate that. And I just want to thank you, Natasha, and thank you also, Dr. Martin, really for your timely remarks that ties in well with, the focus of my presidency. And it's really an honor to be the president of the BSA at such a time as this in our city and our world. I also just want to take a moment to just applaud the amazing job that Natasha has done as well as the board, Eric and the BSA staff in a very tumultuous 2020. So I just want to really take a moment to celebrate you guys. And I really look forward to continuing to work with all of you, as well as the newly elected members of the board. So I'll just briefly mention who those folks are. They're highlighted in green. So we have Anda coming in as the 2022 BSA president. Dan is being re-elected as treasurer. Yanel as vice president of practice. Zanina as director at large. Taylor as public director. And Seth as associate AIA director. So welcome to all of you, and congratulations. So when I ran for this position in 2019, there was no pandemic, there was no economic crisis, and no national groundswell around the need to address racial justice, equality, and systemic police brutality. And so I ran for the BSA presidency because I wanted to support a more equitable and diverse design community in Boston. And given all that has happened over the last 12 months, my commitment to that goal has only strengthened. And it really is to create a Boston that works for everyone. The COVID-19 pandemic confirmed, I think, what we already knew, that low-income communities of color are really disproportionately burdened by poor health, economic and environmental outcomes, and concurrently, very seldom experience the benefits that come from the planning and the development that we're all so passionate about. East Boston, one of the city's most racially diverse neighborhoods, has had the highest rate of COVID-19 infection and is an example of these disparate outcomes and some of the most egregious environmental degradation around Chelsea Creek, right here in our backyard. Design is a process of engagement. And as architects, designers, and planners, I think we all recognize the integral role and responsibility that we have to use our influence to design and build for equity. And it is imperative that as a profession, we begin to understand and address some important connections, which Dr. Atyia Martin just mentioned. And some of the ones that I'm going to be focused on is a connection between equity, the environment, and the economy. And I believe we have to really focus in there to remain relevant as a profession. We still have a lot of work to do on this issue, but I believe strongly that we are equipped to do it. And as Natasha mentioned earlier, we have, and we're fortunate to have the 3 successive BSA presidents who served as co-chairs of the BSA Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Task Force, beginning with Natasha, continuing with my presidency, and welcoming Anda in 2022. So this really ensures that there will be continued focus at the BSA on critical EDI issues. And as Natasha mentioned also, the BSA's Race and Architecture platform was started in 2020 as a listening series about the issues that are affecting BIPOC architects. It was a time of reflection and introspection as an organization to really try to identify areas where the BSA can really have a greater impact on enhancing diversity and inclusion in our profession. And we learned a lot about the disparities in the profession around mentorship, around leadership, housing, design education, policy. And we've had a lot of feedback from membership. So we're taking some time to really absorb that and ask ourselves the question, now what? What do we do with all of the learning that we've been doing over the last 6 months? So next year, I will continue to engage the membership and a new Race and Architecture Advisory Board to take the listening series to the next level with more focus on action and interdisciplinary conversations to really address issues at that intersection of equity and the environment. So we'll foster stronger partnerships with BOSNOMA, NCARB, academic leaders, the BPDA, and others to accelerate the needed cultural shift in the profession and challenge norms. So my hope is that 2021 will be the year that puts in motion a new way of viewing the role of architecture in shaping the future of Boston. And that's a Boston that truly works for everyone. So I'll now turn it over to Ted Touloukian, the BSA Foundation Chair. Thank you.
No, thank you, Greg. And thank you particularly to Natasha as well for her dedicated hard work with the BSA, and to Dr. Martin for her inspiring words that, really reminded us that we need to continue to work hard to fight against injustice and racism so we can advance our city to be more equitable. I was really inspired, with her words about how we need to approach design in order to do better and be better in how we engage communities. And this is at the core of what the foundation is about. With that in mind, I also want to thank the great group of people working together hand in hand to support our membership and our extended design community. Their dedication is really a reflection of how the BSA family collaborates together to improve our conditions and to be more equitable in this extraordinary time. We are a city of diverse neighborhoods with people who care about design and how we can work and live together to make a more equitable city. And this past year, the BSA chapter and the foundation have been committed to closing the gaps in our under-resourced communities. And I'd like to just share a couple of quick examples about how we've been working together to help this cause. This past year, our community design director, Ben Peterson, has worked closely with A number of the design professionals, many on this call today, community stakeholders who have been volunteering to develop our makeshift alternative care sites program. Many of you are aware of this. Really, it's been a process that has developed a database of inventory of buildings and facilities that may be adapted to become alternative care sites for a range of uses, such as hospital overflow, homeless shelters, and area of refuge for a number of people in our disadvantaged communities. In collaboration with over 40 people, principals and firms, first-year emerging professionals, and support from allied software companies, the BSA assembled working groups together. And this is at the core of it, which is how the foundation can really convene a great range of people with the chapter to work together to achieve these goals. And in the makeshift program, we help to identify spatial infrastructure needs, evaluate the real estate inventory that can be paired with these needs, and to create a virtual platform, an online resource, not just for Boston, but for other communities who have similar needs. And what we learned in this past process was that we can be proactive and more responsive to today's needs, but also for the future of pending needs that are so imperative to the city, such as affordable housing, climate change, and the demands that carbon has on our environment. Another example I want to talk about is the Patio Cafe pilot program that our policy director, Jenny Efron, has been working on. This is a remarkable program that has been pulling together a group of teams of volunteer architects who have been working with small businesses in a number of our neighborhoods, helping them activate their storefronts to engage public sidewalks with landscape elements and outdoor seating, and often assisting with sketches, as you see, with design charrettes, as well as permitting to help make this a reality. And in many situations, multilingual volunteers were called upon to help the business owners where English was a second language. And when we consider the impacts that COVID-19 has had on our retail and restaurant businesses, this program could not have come at a better time. And I'm reflecting a little bit on what Dr. Martin had pointed out, is that we need to pursue examples of how we spend time and resources in our communities where burdens exist. And we need to do the work that is so important in advancing social justice and resisting racism. And as we all been sharing this morning, I think that the BSA is particularly thankful to the architects, our allied professionals, and our community stakeholders for their persistent participation and leadership in the creation of safe and healthy, sustainable and resilient, as well as equitable and architecturally vibrant communities. As Greg pointed out, we still have a lot of work to do, but without all of us intentionally collaborating together, we can't overcome the challenges in front of us. Next, please. This all happens not just through the much appreciated time and ideas from our members and communities, but also through the generous donations that have been provided to the BSA. I'd like to really take a moment to thank all of the individuals and firms who have generously offered their support with major gifts, as well as those who have been a part of the Legacy Circle and the emerging philanthropist groups. So in conclusion, as we speak, I believe our BSA staff is going to post in the chat a link to our website where you can give. And we understand that this is a personal choice relevant for each of us. So any amount is appreciated. And I think it reminds us that, all of our generosity is really helping the city grow to not only be, more equitable, also inclusive, but also to create a strong, diverse community. So thank you for that and this time, and I'll turn it back to Greg.
Thank you, Ted, for spurring us on there. And in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to welcome Dan Peruzzi to provide us with a high-level review of the 2021 budget.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Obviously, we saved the best of the program for the last, so we'll dive right in. If we can go to the next slide, that'd be great. Okay, so obviously we had a plan for 2020 that changed in March. And I have to say the BSA staff and the BSA executive director, Eric White, responded quickly, responded really well. We made significant expense reductions. We cut staff very regrettably. No exhibitions. We cut Architecture Boston. We reduced our communications effort. In general, we cut back quite a bit, and the result is that we have actually reduced our deficit. So for 2020, we were projecting a loss of $225,000. Based on where we are now and looking forward to end of year, we believe that's actually going to be a $190,000 loss, which is significant, and I'll explain the context for that also. If we can go to next. So for the 2021 budget, we're anticipating that we will be dealing with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic probably through the fall of 2021 in terms of the ability to generate revenue and our standpoint on expenses. We're going to continue, though, to close the annual operating deficit after the sale of ABX. So all of you know, we sold ABX. That source of revenue left a big budget hole, which we have been slowly closing. We actually look like in 2022, we may be running either a much smaller deficit or possibly a slight profit, which would be great. And I'll explain how we backstop that also. But we're going to keep our focus on those 4 impact areas that Natasha and Greg have been talking about: advancing architecture, equity and justice, the environment, and community. Next one, please. So just a few notes for next year, this coming budget, 2021. We're anticipating an 8% decline in membership, just based on what we think is going to happen to the overall architectural community in this area. We are not going to pursue a dues increase for 2021. We had initially talked about that, but we've suspended that. We're going to continue virtual programming for the foreseeable future, but we will begin charging non-members for knowledge community participation. We have some funding in the budget, a modest amount for restarting Architecture Boston. We have not thought through what that will be when it's restarted, but we have included some money. We will be funding our equity, diversity, inclusion work. We recognize there'll be reduced revenue from classified jobs. We believe we can get some revenue growth from integrated sales. And obviously there'll be reduced revenue from the BSA space. Now, an important point, our current reserves and endowments stand at $7.8 million. The BSA has $7.8 million in the bank, which is significant because we'll talk about that in just one moment when we go to the next slide. Okay, and so this gives you a good snapshot of where we were in 2019, where we estimate we're going to be at the end of 2020 and where we're going in 2021. Revenue, we're looking at some decrease, obviously, in 2020, but a slight uptick in 2021. Expenses for 2020, we reduced them significantly. They'll be slightly higher in 2021. Now, this is the line that's really important for everybody, the operating surplus and deficit. 2019 was $400,000 deficit. 2020 is going to turn out to be somewhere around $188,000. 2021, we're anticipating $60,000 deficit. Now, that deficit is backstopped by the proceeds from the $7.8 million that we have in the endowment, and we're fortunate to have that. Those other lines, depreciation is a nice way to confuse, that accountants use to confuse normal people like you and I. That's not really cash out the door. And the investment line is a little misleading because it would make you think that we are in the hole by $60,000. We're not. We anticipate that that total of 7.8 will have been reduced by $60,000 over the course of the year because of the performance of the stock market and other equity funds that we are invested in. So when you look at that bottom line, that surplus and deficit, in my mind, that's really a fictitious number. The line that we all want to focus on is that middle one, the operating surplus and deficit. Focus on the fact that 2020, it's going to be 188,000, and by 2021, we will reduce that to $60,000. That's an important trajectory for us to keep in mind. Next slide, please. Well, so that is the end of the presentation. The budget. I should ask for questions. If anyone has questions, put them into the chat. Otherwise, Greg, I think this is you.
All right. So I will ask you to recommend, Dan, a motion for the budget to be approved, unless there's discussion or questions, which I don't see any. So we will, I believe, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, but we had, Dan, you're recommending that the budget be approved?
We are, correct.
And we're going to ask for a second.
And I think we have that from Janelle.
Okay, the motion carries. And
We just need to ask for a vote. We just need to vote now from the membership. I think if everyone, just a point here, because we're doing this electronically, if everyone can unmute, and if you are vote in favor, please speak up. If you vote opposed when Greg asks, if there is if it's close, then we'll look to do a vote electronically. But if it's if everyone's in favor, then we can move on.
Aye.
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 So Greg asking if there's any opposed or any abstain. And this is actually open only to the BSA AIA members.
Okay. So any opposition or abstentions? So hearing none, the motion carries and the budget is approved.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Yes.
So thank you all. I believe this concludes the formal part of our presentation. I just want to remind everyone that there is a bylaws meeting on Wednesday, January 6th at 8 a.m. And we encourage all of you to attend that special meeting. It's a member-only meeting, I should clarify that. All right, in closing, I just want to also encourage all of you, going back to Ted's points about support for the BSA Foundation, and just want to encourage you and thank you if you've already supported, and just encourage you and your networks to support the foundation. We do a lot of important programming through that channel, and you know, it depends on the on that funding. So I appreciate your consideration there. And with that, that concludes my part of the presentation. Now, do I close this out, Eric, or will you close this out?
You close it out. So.
All right, so I will close it out. And if we don't speak or see each other again before the holidays and New Year, have a Happy New Year and enjoy your holidays and stay safe, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.